The pen was already touching the paper when the janitor's cart knocked against the boardroom door. No one looked up. Why would they? The man pushing it was nobody, a maintenance worker in gray coveralls, 3 days of stubble on his chin, a laminated visitor badge clipped to his chest because he'd lost his permanent one somewhere between the parking garage and the 14th floor. His name was Tate Dillon, and he was 41 minutes late to clean a room he hadn't been told was still occupied. Vivian Ashcroft did not look up either. She was the one holding the pen, a matte black fountain pen, not gold, because she'd never been the kind of woman who needed her instruments to announce themselves. The paper beneath it was a restructuring agreement. 47 pages. Her legal team had reviewed it 3 times. Her CFO had reviewed it twice. The opposing counsel had flown in from Philadelphia specifically to watch her sign it, which she found quietly humiliating in a way she hadn't told anyone. Outside, Chicago moved the way Chicago always moved in November. Fast, gray, indifferent. The kind of cold that finds the gap between your collar and your neck no matter how you dress. Inside, the silence was the particular kind that happens when everyone in a room is pretending not to hold their breath. Ms. Ashcroft. Her general counsel, a lean man named Fletcher, who wore his suits one size too large, slid the final page toward her. Page 47. Signature line, then initial the amendment on 32. Vivian pressed the tip of the pen to the line. She'd built Ashcroft Capital Partners from a 2-person advisory shop in a Wicker Park walk-up to a mid-market private equity firm managing close to $4 billion in assets. 21 years. She'd done it without a famous last name, without a family endowment, without a single mentor who hadn't eventually tried to take something from her. She had done it, mostly, alone. And now a liquidity crisis 18 months in the making, exacerbated by a leveraged position that had looked conservative in 2023 and catastrophic by the fall of 2025, had walked her into this room, in front of these men, to sign away the controlling interest in the firm she had named after herself. Fletcher said her name again, softer this time, which somehow made it worse. The janitor's cart rolled farther into the room. "Sorry," the man said, not sounding particularly sorry. "Didn't know anyone was still in here? I'll come back." "Please do," said opposing counsel, a compact, expensive man named Whitfield, without turning around. But the man with the cart didn't leave. Vivian looked up. He was standing at the edge of the room near the credenza, and he was looking at the wall screen. Not at her. Not at the lawyers. At the financial summary that her CFO Renata had left projected there after the morning session, a dense grid of quarterly disbursements, operational liabilities, and asset valuations across 6 portfolio companies. He was squinting at it the way people squint at something that doesn't add up. "Sir," Fletcher's voice had an edge now, "this is a private proceeding." "Yeah!" The man didn't move. "I see that." Whitfield finally turned. "Security can escort you out, probably." He pulled a rag from his back pocket and turned it over in his hands, slowly. His eyes hadn't left the screen. "But you've got a problem on line 44. The room went still in a different way than it had been still before. Vivian put the cap back on her pen. She didn't know why, she just did. "Line 44, she said. "Operational disbursements for Ridgeway Logistics." He pointed, not with the rag, just with his index finger, from across the room. "That figure's been carried forward from Q2, but if you cross it with the reconciliation summary on the left panel," he moved his finger slightly, "the Q3 actuals came in 11% under projection. You're carrying a liability on a number that was already resolved. Somebody applied the override to the wrong column." Whitfield laughed. It was a short, controlled laugh, the kind deployed specifically to end conversations. "I appreciate the input. 11% of Ridgeway's quarterly disbursement allocation," the man said, still calm, "is about $63 million. No one laughed after that. Renata, Vivian's CFO, had been sitting at the far end of the table running silent calculations on a tablet she'd been pretending not to use. Vivian watched her stop, watched her look at the screen, watched something move across her face that Renata, who had worked for her for 9 years, almost never let show. "Run that again," Vivian said. "Mrs. Ashcroft?" Fletcher started. "Renata." Vivian stood. "Pull up the Q3 Ridgeway reconciliation." This is highly irregular, Whitfield said. Most truthings are. Vivian walked toward the screen. Who are you? The man looked at her for the first time properly. He had tired eyes, the kind of tired that isn't about sleep. Tate Dillon, I'm covering the evening maintenance rotation. Phil, the regular guy, called out sick. Do you work in finance? I work in janitorial services. A pause. But I used to work in logistics operations. 7 years. Before my wife got sick and I needed something with better shift flexibility. He folded the rag and put it back in his pocket. I've looked at a lot of disbursement tables. Vivian turned back to the screen. Renata had pulled up the reconciliation file. The room was very quiet. Outside the window, a plane crossed the gray sky, blinking. It took Renata 4 minutes to find it. There's a formula error, she said. Her voice was the carefully flat tone of someone managing something large. The Q3 Ridgeway actuals were reconciled in the audit file, but the carry forward in the summary model wasn't updated. The liability figure on line 44 is reflecting pre-reconciliation numbers. How much? Vivian said, though she already knew. 61.4 million. In our favor. The room absorbed this the way rooms absorb things that change everything. Slowly, unevenly, with different people arriving at the implications at different speeds. Whitfield's expression did not change, which told Vivian more than if it had. This doesn't alter the fundamental terms, he said. The liquidity position changes significantly with 61 million in recaptured liability, Vivian said. The agreement was negotiated in good faith based on an error. She picked up the pen from the table, not to sign, to hold. Fletcher. We're adjourning Ashcroft. If we adjourn now, we adjourn now. She looked at Whitfield. Your clients have had access to the same financial data we have for 90 days. If this error was invisible to your team, that's one story. If it wasn't, that's a different story entirely, and I'd encourage your clients to think carefully about which story they want told in a Delaware court. She set the pen down. We'll reschedule. Whitfield gathered his documents without hurry, the way men like him always do, performing composure. He left without a word to anyone but his associate. Fletcher looked like he needed to sit down. He sat down. Renata was still staring at the screen, and Tate Dillon was pushing his cart toward the door, which he'd apparently decided to clean since he was already there. Mr. Dillon, Vivian said. He stopped. Stay, please. He turned. He had the look of a man who expected to be thanked briefly and dismissed. Sit down. He looked at the cart, then at the conference table, then at her. I've got 3 more floors. I know. Sit down anyway. He sat in one of the chairs at the end of the table, not all the way in, just on the edge of it, the way people sit when they're not sure they've been invited, or when they're used to being told to get up. Vivian poured 2 glasses of water from the pitcher on the credenza and set one in front of him. How did you see it? She asked. He looked at the glass. I was standing there long enough. The numbers didn't sync. Disbursements that large don't usually carry that kind of variance without a flag, unless someone manually overrode the reconciliation column. He shrugged. In logistics, that's usually where the mistakes live, or the decisions that were supposed to look like mistakes. Vivian looked at him for a moment. That last part, it might be nothing. It might not be. He nodded. He wasn't in a hurry to fill the silence, which she appreciated. You have a daughter, she said. It wasn't a question. There was a child's drawing laminated and clipped to his badge lanyard, visible when he'd first walked in. A house. A sun with 7 spokes. The word daddy in green crayon. Mira. She's 6. Something in his face changed when he said it, not softened exactly, but unlocked. She drew that in August. I laminated it because she asked me to. Vivian thought about the pen, about page 47, about what she would have driven home to tonight. Your wife, she said carefully, 14 months ago. He said it plainly, the way people say things they've had to say many times. Ovarian cancer, stage 4 at diagnosis. He looked at the water glass. We had about 8 months from the diagnosis. Mira was 5. Vivian didn't say she was sorry. She'd been on the receiving end of enough sorry to know it didn't land anywhere useful. Instead, she said, and the logistics job? Couldn't do it anymore. The hours. Mira's in 1st grade, and her school lets out at 3, and I don't have anyone. He stopped. Started again. I don't have anyone else. So I took the maintenance position because the shift ends at 4. I pick her up at 3:15. She comes and does her homework in the break room on the nights I work late. Vivian looked at the conference table. 22 chairs. A room that had hosted deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. A room where she had, on multiple occasions, been the only woman. "What did you do before logistics?" she asked. "Operations analysis. I have a degree in applied mathematics from DePaul." He said it without pride or apology, just as a fact he was reporting. "Did my MBA part-time at Loyola while my wife was doing her residency. We had plans." He paused. "Plans change." Vivian nodded. The city outside the window had gone darker. Someone in the building across the street was turning off lights floor by floor, working upward. "I'm going to ask you something," she said, "and I want you to understand that the answer doesn't obligate you to anything and won't affect your position here regardless of what you say." He waited. "Renata is going to spend the next 72 hours pulling every reconciliation file we have for the past 18 months. She'll be looking for the same class of error or the same class of decision dressed up as an error across every portfolio company." She paused. "I'd like a second set of eyes, someone who thinks the way you think, who looks at where disbursements live." He was quiet for a long moment. "I have a daughter," he said. "I know. She gets out at 3:15. There are 12 conference rooms in this building. One of them will become Mira's homework room for as long as this takes. We'll have someone from the team pick her up if you're needed here." She looked at him steadily. "And we'll pay you for your time at a consulting rate, not a maintenance rate." Tate looked at the laminated drawing on his lanyard. "What do you think you're going to find?" he asked. "I don't know." She was honest about it. "But someone let $61 million sit in the wrong column for a quarter and a half. Either that's incompetence or it's choreography. Either way, I'd like to know before I sign anything." He was quiet again. Outside, the last of the day's light was leaving the tops of the buildings. 3:15, he said. 3:15, she agreed. He nodded. "Okay." What they found over the next 6 days was not one error. It was a pattern. Renata and Tate worked in the same conference room, which quickly accumulated the debris of extended analysis. Coffee cups, printed spreadsheets marked in red and blue pen, a whiteboard that filled and was erased and filled again. Mira came every afternoon at 3:15 with a backpack shaped like a fox and spread her homework across one corner of the table, doing arithmetic, while the adults on the other end ran numbers that had commas in them she couldn't yet comprehend. The pattern, once visible, was elegant in the way that fraudulent things sometimes are. A disbursement override applied across 7 portfolio companies, small enough in each individual case to survive a standard audit, cumulative enough over 6 quarters to manufacture the appearance of a liquidity shortfall that didn't actually exist at the scale being reported. It was, as Tate had said quietly on the third night, looking at the whiteboard, not an accident. It was a mechanism. The question of who had built the mechanism took another 4 days. Vivian let her legal team and an outside forensic accounting firm handle that part because she already suspected the answer, and suspected it in a way that made her want to be very careful about the chain of evidence. The answer, when it came, was Gordon Whitfield's client, not the private equity firm making the acquisition, but a specific partner within that firm who had also, for the past 3 years, been receiving advisory fees from a shell entity that held a secondary interest in 2 of Ashcroft Capital's portfolio companies. A conflict of interest so precisely structured it had been invisible unless you knew where to look. Unless you knew, specifically, that disbursements that large don't usually carry that kind of variance without a flag. Unless someone had looked at a lot of tables. The deal did not close. What happened instead was a referral to the SEC's Division of Enforcement. A voluntary disclosure by Whitfield's firm of the conflict of interest, which Vivian had charitably given them 48 hours to make before she made it herself, and the quiet departure of the partner in question from the firm he'd helped build over 17 years. Ashcroft Capital Partners did not sign over its controlling interest. Vivian called her bank the following Monday, restructured the credit facility, brought in 2 new limited partners she'd been cultivating for a year, both of whom, it turned out, had been hesitating precisely because the deal with Whitfield's clients had made the firm look distressed in a way they couldn't fully account for. With the accurate liability figures on the table, the picture changed. The firm was not healthy in the way she wanted it to be, but it was hers. On the last afternoon, Tate packed up his notebooks. He'd bought 3, spiral-bound, from the CVS on Michigan Avenue, and came to find her in her office. She was at her desk. The view behind her was the same gray sky it had always been, but she was looking at it differently. "I think that's everything you need from me," he said. "I think so too." She stood. "Come in." He sat in the chair across from her desk. Mira was in the conference room down the hall, working on something with a glue stick, supervised by an assistant who had, over 6 days, become genuinely fond of her. Vivian slid an envelope across the desk. He opened it. He looked at it for a moment without speaking. "This is more than consulting rate," he said. "You're welcome to negotiate it down if you feel strongly." He looked at the number again. It would not change everything, but it would change some things. The particular category of things that matter most when you are raising a 6-year-old alone, and you've been running the math in your head every month for over a year. "I don't know how to say thank you for this," he said. "You don't have to." She paused. "I want to offer you something else." He waited. "Renata is building out a portfolio monitoring function. Something internal, dedicated, not outsourced, not periodic, but embedded. Someone who actually reads the numbers the way you read them, who looks for the thing that doesn't sink." She looked at him directly. "The hours are structured. 8 to 3. Benefits. The pay is considerably more than this, because I should have had this function 2 years ago and I didn't, and that's a gap I intend to close." Tate sat with this for a moment. Outside, Chicago was making the particular sound it makes in late November. Wind off the lake, the low percussion of traffic, the city going about its business without sentiment. 8 to 3, he said. 8 to 3. He looked at the envelope, then at his lanyard, where Mira's drawing was still clipped, the sun with 7 spokes, the word daddy in green crayon. "She'd like the break room," he said. Vivian smiled. Not a boardroom smile, not a press photo smile, the real kind. "She already knows where the good snacks are." He laughed. It was a short laugh, a little rough around the edges, the laugh of someone remembering how to do it. "Okay," he said. "Okay." He stood, shook her hand, walked back down the hall toward the conference room, where his daughter was pressing something sparkly onto a piece of construction and talking to the assistant about whether foxes could be purple. Vivian turned back to the window. The sky was still gray, Chicago was still cold, the firm's name was still on the door. She picked up the pen, the matte black fountain pen, the one that hadn't signed anything on the day it was supposed to, and put it back in the drawer where it belonged. Not in a dramatic way, just because it was done. Some people spend their whole lives in rooms where no one looks at them. They carry their knowledge the way you carry something valuable when you can't afford to put it down, quietly, constantly, without anyone asking what's in your hands. Tate Dillon had walked into the wrong room on the right night, pushing a cart no one was supposed to notice, and he had looked at a number that no one else had bothered to read, and in doing so, he had saved something that 21 years had built. He hadn't done it for a reward. He hadn't done it for recognition. He'd done it because the numbers didn't sink, and he was the kind of man who couldn't walk past a thing that didn't add up. Even when he was 41 minutes late, even when the room was full of people who wouldn't look at him, even when his whole life had taught him that looking too closely at things other people controlled was a good way to get hurt. The world had not been particularly kind to Tate Dillon, but he had stayed precise. He had stayed honest. He had kept showing up and carrying what he carried, and reading the columns that no one asked him to read. And one evening in November, in a glass-walled conference room on the 14th floor of a building in Chicago, that had been exactly enough.